And a great librarian, like a great bookseller or a parent who's followed your readings for years, they know what you're ready for. She knew exactly what I needed. And she pulled off from the fiction shelf a slim little volume called In Our Time by Ernest Hemingway. Mm-hmm. And, you got to picture a kid who's 11 who already loves the outdoors, who's trapped in the city.
Yeah.
I cracked that open. My heart just about fell out of my chest. I mean, I was like, I want to do that. I want to hop off a slow moving freight in Upper Michigan with a rucksack, walk up a hill with grass wetting my pants, with dew, and make camp by the Big Two Hearted River. And I wanted to not burn my tongue on the coffee the way Nick didn't burn his tongue.
Yeah.
I didn't know the guy was traumatized, that's what the story was probably really about. I just thought it was all cool. And I wanted to fish for those gorgeous trout. And mostly what I wanted was to write like this guy.
Hello, and welcome to Sidechannels, presented by the Fly Fish Journal. My name is Jason Rolfe, and I'm the editor of the Fly Fish Journal, as well as the host of Sidechannels, along with my colleague and friend, our photo editor, Kopi Voita. Today we've got author Peter Heller on the show. In fact, we'll have Peter on the next two shows because we were having such a good time talking with him that the interview ended up going quite long. So I figured we'd break it up into a couple more digestible chunks for you. But before we get there, I want to let you know that Sidechannels is made possible thanks to the support of Decked. In fact, that's not the only thing made possible by Decked. Keeping my truck bed organized is made possible by Decked as well. Thanks to Decked, I never have to wonder where my gear is. Flybox is an extra tippet, small deco case in the left side drawer. Camp stove and coffee maker, large deco case, same drawer. Microphones, cables, and mic stands for recording this podcast, right side drawer, neatly organized. Empty zinc containers pulling double duty as fly holders, they're in the drawer organizer with the sunscreen. That's right, drawer organizer. I couldn't be happier with my setup. I can get on the road quick, get weighted up, and get on the water ASAP without the hassle of digging around my truck bed for gear. So, do it. Get decked, get after it. You won't regret it. Visit decked.com/flyfish to find the system that's right for you. Sidechannels is also supported by Patagonia Fly Fishing. Patagonia's commitment to making solid gear that stands up to all the abuse you can throw at it is matched by their dedication to our home planet. They've had some great things brewing recently, including their new Swift Current Expedition waders, which you can find a review of at theflyfishjournal.com. Built on exploration, these waders are purpose-made for connecting with wild fish and inspired by the tireless anglers and groups fighting to protect the clean water those fish depend on. Visit patagonia.com/fly-fishing to learn more about the new Swift Current Expedition Series waders and the community of conservationists and environmental advocates that makes Patagonia what it is. Finally, if you are a fan of what we do over here and haven't already, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the Fly Fish Journal. Nothing beats the feeling and smell of getting 116 pages of pure fly fishing storytelling in your mailbox 4 times each year. We wouldn't be here without our subscribers, and we'd love to have you be a part of that crew. So, yeah, Peter Heller, author of The Dog Stars, The Guide, The River, and most recently Burn, which was published last year by Knopf. Peter is someone I was really looking forward to talking to, not only because I've been a big fan of his novels ever since I read The Dog Stars, but also because the more I dug into his background, the more I realized that this is a guy who has lived a pretty rich and varied life. In fact, prior to publishing his first novel, The Dog Stars, in 2012, at the age of 50, Peter had already spent more than 2 decades working as a journalist for magazines like Outside and Men's Journal, and had published 4 works of nonfiction, including Hell or High Water in 2004. Kopi and I met up with Peter this spring at his home in Denver, overlooking the Front Range. And right away, we jumped into a pretty wide-ranging and entertaining conversation. Ever since he was a kid, Peter has been the kind of person who seeks out adventure. I think partly as a way to challenge himself, but also as a way to simply know himself better. In this first part of the episode, we chat with Peter about some of his recent adventures, as well as his beginnings as a writer and his work in nonfiction. In part 2, which we'll post in a couple weeks, we take up Peter Heller, the fiction writer, beginning with the publication of Dog Stars. Let's do the show.
I have a friend he's a National Geographic photographer, and he lives right up the block in the neighborhood. And we met years ago at a coffee shop. I don't know how we found each other, but somehow we were eyeing. I was working on a story. I think I maybe had a bunch of books on Antarctica and whaling or something like that. And he came over and talked to me, and we became fast friends. And he was taking pictures of polar bears way up on Hudson Bay, and got really intrigued by this wolf pack that he kept seeing that were twice as big as Yellowstone wolves. I mean, the males get to like 200 pounds. And
what part of Hudson Bay is this?
So West Coast, Churchill is 2/3 of the way up.
Okay.
And then 130 miles south of that, excuse me, is a lodge, and it's on a stretch of coast that's 400 miles long, has one active grass airstrip.
Wow.
And you can't get in by boat because the tidal flats are so shallow and there's no roads. And so it's a wilderness area the size of California. I mean, it is gigantic. And the animals there are not like Yellowstone or anything else. They've never seen people most of the time. And so, you'll be out on foot and a polar bear will just come across the tundra on the tidal flat and just stand 30 feet away and look at you with
what is this?
Sort of like smacking its lips like, I haven't eaten in 2 months. It's invigorating. I just love being up there. It's so wild. So anyway, he started a citizen science wolf program to this lodge to figure out what these wolves were, because nobody knew. Were they cloud wolves? Were they gray wolves? Were they timber wolves? Were they some Pleistocene, leftover? So we went up for the first couple of weeks. I did a story for, I think it was Condé Nast Traveler or something. And we were the first 2 weeks of that program, and it blew my mind. We would be walking along in the willow berms with the coast just off to the east, and a lone wolf would walked right by, just trotted right by Kim and I, stood 6 feet away. I almost could have touched its nose. And she was a big female, and she squinted down her eyes in the blowing snow and just smelled us, and then circled once and trotted off.
Wow.
You don't get this, that close. And then the whole pack came by the next day, and they were singing and pups playing and everything. And so in any event, this guy, one of his gigs, because he's piecing his life together like a lot of us who write and are journalists and stuff, he does gigs on cruise ships, speaking about photography and about his adventures. He was a combat photographer when he was a kid, and is very adventurous. And I guess one of the speakers of the cultural enrichment program on this ship, Baghdad, they got sick or something. And they said, do you know anyone who can tell stories? And he didn't even hesitate. He said, oh yeah, I got a guy. So we went on this trip with him, and it was great. It was 16 days from Darwin, Thursday Island, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Fiji, and places that I've never been and very few people visit. You have to make a determined effort to get over there. And so it was super, super cool. It was heartening to be hours and hours and hours along a coast, hours, and see of Papua New Guinea and see nothing, not even a single shack, you know. And I realized that there are parts of the world that are still pretty much untainted by two-leggeds, you know. I'm not talking birds. That was really cool. Rugged coast with nobody there for hundreds of miles. Wild country. And so, yeah, it was a good trip. I mean, I just got back. I still think it's 2 a.m. So anyway, and just to say, you know, I got so intrigued by this place up in Hudson Bay. Maybe we'll get to that, but there are all these rivers. You know, it's wet country, and there's rivers coming into the bay every few miles, and they've never been fished. And so I got really intrigued by that and came up. I did a story for Modern Huntsman, and we somehow got a John boat with a little 15-horse motor up through the rocks in the kind of at the mouth of the river where it met the bay, clunked up this one river by the lodge, the Opoyasin, and caught onto smooth water, went up, I don't know, 3 or 4 miles up into the big timber. And polar bears were thick in the woods, you know. I mean, you know, you just had to, you know, and wolves, everything, snowy owls and thousands. It was mid-September. There were thousands of geese, snow geese, Canada geese on the grass flats. Yeah. The harriers were migrating. So you'd see, you know, these harriers hunting. And we fished this, got out, and it was waist deep for, you know, miles. We waded downstream in this guy and Nolan, and caught so many frigging huge brook trout. I couldn't even move my arm the next day. I mean, it was like some dream. You know, this river had never ever been fished. They use it in the wintertime as a sort of a highway for the snow machine. You know, the skidoos
freezes over.
But nobody had ever you know, gotten a boat up there. And pretty neat to fish totally virgin river. And there were some sea run brook trout, and they're, you know, completely their genetics has been unmessed with. Completely pure strains of brook trout, and huge.
So cool.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So anyway,
there's something just so comforting in a way. I feel like I've thought about this a few times before, but just the idea that there are still places like that, and that are untouched, like you're saying, and that are almost kind of like a model in a way for what we could maybe go back to, or what we can at least sort of aim for in some of these places where it's been a little mucked up. I don't know if you have that same sense or that same optimism, but
you know,
it's,
Jason,
at least it's there.
Yes. And, you know, when you've been in a place like that, I don't know about you guys, but I sort of carry it around with me. You know, it's sort of a touchstone, and just talking about it right now, you know, I sort of get transported, and it's nourishing. I mean, it's sort of like, I love to, it's more than a memory. It's like almost like a cellular hum inside that, you know, that place, that I've been to a place like that it exists, that the stuff I felt and smelled and touched when I was there, I still sort of physically carry with me. And I think it makes my life better for sure. It is comforting, but it's more than comforting. It's church. It really is. Yeah. So, very cool.
It seems like this is a theme for you, going sort of beyond the bounds of you know, places that humans have really touched, and kind of, it seems like pushing yourself. I know you have a pretty deep history with kayaking. You've written the book. Oh, I forget the name.
Hell or High Water.
Hell or High Water.
Sangpo Gorge. Yeah. Another place.
And I'd love to hear some stories about that. I'm wondering what the sort of foundation of that drive to go places like that was for you?
Yeah.
Do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I always, ever since I was a little kid, I've always been more comfortable in trees and bushes and than with people. I mean, I grew up in New York City, and I was the kid in the bushes around the playground. I didn't go in the playground, and I spent summers, outdoors in the Adirondacks and on the Long Island Sound. And, I knew early on from, probably 6, 7, 8 years old that those were the places that fed me. And that I needed. And, who knows why? I don't know why. I think we all do. I think, it's probably cliche to say, but our genes were forged, out on the wild plains, on the Serengeti, up in Mongolia, in the caves and the jungles. And I think in small groups where we were very close to weather and streams that were flooding and drying up and storm and I think we carry the need to be fed by all those things with us in this crazy modern world where we get more and more separated from it. And so, I don't know. I always wanted to go to wild places. And I think literature is part of that too. I read Joseph Conrad early, and, Heart of Darkness, burned itself into myself. It's like, I want to go upriver. I don't care if there's a really bad guy up there.
Yeah.
And people shooting bows and arrows from the woods. It's like, I want to go up there. And I read Jack London voraciously, and Robert Louis Stevenson, and Hemingway, and the Nick Adams stories were some of my earliest fiction. I wanted to do that. I was wandering around my library in my little school in Brooklyn Heights, and I was 11, and I had a crush on the librarian. I would have married her that day. Her name was Annie Bosworth. She was English. I would have married her for the way she said my name. She said, Pita. I was like, yes. So are you looking for something to read? And I was like, thud, thud, And she took me over to the fiction shelf, and a great librarian, like a great bookseller or parent who's followed your reading for years, they know what you're ready for. She knew exactly what I needed. And she pulled off from the fiction shelf a slim little volume called In Our Time by Ernest Hemingway. And, you got to picture a kid who's 11 who already loves the outdoors, who's trapped in the city.
Yeah.
I cracked that open. My heart just about fell out of my chest. I mean, I was like, I want to do that. I want to hop off a slow moving freight in upper Michigan with a rucksack, walk up a hill with grass wetting my pants, with dew, and make camp by the Big Two Hearted River. And I wanted to not burn my tongue on the coffee the way Nick didn't burn his tongue.
Yeah.
I didn't know the guy was traumatized, that's what the story was probably really about. I just thought it was all cool. And I wanted to fish for those gorgeous trout. And mostly what I wanted was to write like this guy, not like him, but with that power, because it was one of the first times that prose sort of went through my skin straight to my heart, kind of bypassed the head. Yeah. And from then on, it's like I wanted to be a man of action, but I wanted to write with that kind of power. And I sort of bent myself towards that, that goal and that path, since I was that age. And,
like early teens?
Yeah, like 11.
11.
But, part of that, the loving those stories was just the country that it described. And him being able to be all by himself and make camp by that river and just fish for days, I thought how incredible. So literature was a big part of it. Yeah.
How did, jumping back to Hell or High Water, was that one of your first things you did? Well, you did the story for, I think, Outside magazine about going out there. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then the book came from that later?
Yeah.
How, it sounds like getting that gig to go kayak out there was a bit fortuitous. How did that come about with outside?
Well, I'd been sort of their kayak guy for a bunch of years.
Was that really a thing that was, I'm kind of guessing that it, being the kayak guy for Outside Magazine, you probably were one of the first kayak guys in general. Does that make sense?
Well,
because Outside was really at the forefront. But in the sense that, Outside has been around since late 60s, early 70s.
I think it's the 70s. I remember hearing
70s.
about it like sort of late 70s.
And they were really, there were outdoor publications before that, Field and Stream and whatnot, but there wasn't anything like Outside. And
that's true, yeah.
And so, when was this that you were starting to write about kayaking for them?
I think I got my first assignment, let's see. It was a trip to do a first descent. It was probably 89, maybe 88, somewhere in there. What happened is, I got out of, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I did everything I could do to try and be a great writer. I heard Jack London put words up that he didn't know on the wall. I did that. I did all this stuff. Was an English major, studied biology, so I'd know the difference between a spruce and a pine. I thought that would be important if I'm writing about the outdoors. So I took a lot of biology. And I went to Dartmouth, so a school in the country where there were a lot of outdoor people. And that was awesome to have that sort of brother and sisterhood. And I found out, I got out of school and I found out, you can't make a living being a poet, short story writer. They should have told us, right?
Yeah.
So I was doing every job. I was in Boulder and living with a friend. He was training for the Olympics. He was a ski jumper, one of my best friends. He taught me to kayak, and he said, come out. I got a cheap room in Boulder, but that's how old I am. There's no cheap rooms in Boulder now
anymore.
Not even a cheap doghouse. So anyway, and I was teaching kayaking. I was doing construction, delivering pizza, doing every damn thing, and skiing on Mondays because my buddy had a free ticket for me. He was a ski instructor at Breckenridge. So I go up there. I remember vividly driving back from skiing one evening to his cabin, and he said, hey, you're doing you're kayaking all this crazy stuff. You're in your room writing poems. Why don't you combine your interests and write for Outside Magazine? And, being young and dumb, you don't know what you can't do. Thank God. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went down to the magazine store, and this is when they actually still have magazines. And I picked an Outside off the rack. And I looked down the masthead for a name that sounded nice, a senior editor, Laura Honhold, and I called the 800 number, and it was when they were still in Chicago. Somebody picked up, and they said, Outside Magazine. And I said, Laura Honhold, please. and she said, just a minute. And then I was like, I was paralyzed. And I hear Laura here. I was like, oh, crap. And I started talking as fast as I could. I said, hey, I'm a writer. I live in Boulder, and I just had a short story published in Harper's, which was sort of true. It was a little reprint of a college story in the reading section up front about, it was practically in the margin, but it was there. And I said, I kayak class 5, and I think you should send me on this expedition to run this river that's never been run on the Tibetan Plateau. And there was this incredulous silence. And she goes, what issue was the Harper's?
I got to do some research first.
I said August. And she said, there's this pause. And she said, I'm going to take a chance on you. We've heard about this expedition. We'd like to cover it. We don't have a writer that can kayak class 5. And I'm going to send you, I'm going to pay half your expenses. And if you write a good story, I'll pay the other half and buy the story. And how's that sound? I was like, that sounds pretty good. I was like dancing around. I was like, I'm going to buy a new paddle tomorrow. Mine's all duct taped together. So I went, and I'm not going to tell the whole story, but it was a guy died on the first day. I was at one of the 3 kayakers, and the rest were all professional river runners in rafts, paddle rafts. They had a couple that wasn't professional river runners. who were athletic, loved to canoe, and they thought they'd just put each one in a paddle raft and they'd be fine, follow orders, right? But it was the husband that died, and he died in my arms. And it was like that scene in Sometimes a Great Notion. The river he was in a log jam. We were trying to get him out with a Z-drag. We couldn't. And I held his head up and the river rose over his head. And I had to paddle across and tell his new wife that he was dead. And, I came back from that and I was grieving hard. And I called Laura and said, I can't write your story. And she said, why not? And I think I meant it for like 45 minutes. I know I was traumatized, it's like, and she said, you go write that. And I wrote a 7,000 word story that, a lot longer than what they usually publish. And it was their submission for the magazine award that year. And it sort of launched this career, first writing more about, about kayaking. And I knew that if I didn't take another story right away, another expedition story, probably wouldn't paddle again. I sort of like get back in the saddle. And so I took a story from Playboy, which is, you think of as an indoor magazine, but they have a
rich
history. They had, back then they were really some of the best writers writing for them. And I was extremely honored to get the assignment. And I went with these Russians and Kiwis, and I was one of two kayakers to do this river. It was supposed to be the Everest of rivers in the Soviet Union. It was in Tajikistan and the Pamirs, and there were like a dead snow leopard in the first camp. And it was a crazy trip. The first camp, we were at like probably 9,000 feet. And the leader of the Kiwi side of the expedition said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we started, higher than Mount Cook, which is 12,600 feet? Really high. And it was dusk. And he said, what? Hey, Roy, Pete, we're a couple of kayakers. What, you throw your boats in the chopper, and go up there to that altitude. So we threw our sleeping bags in there because it was dusk, and a bag of sour balls, and they dropped us off in this stony, sort of stony slope, this dry mountains, and this little friggin' creek. And it took us 3 days to get down. We had one bag of sour balls, and there were wolf tracks in the sand. And I mean, it was like epic. And we had to run blind a lot, walled in.
Just not able to scout ahead.
Yeah, the couple of the guys, the leader and this guy Dave Allardyce, who was a legend in Nepal, they came and they ran along. So we were all in it together. They ran along ahead and would go, they'd make these arm motions, left, then center, then right. But sometimes we couldn't meet them because of the way the terrain was, and so we just see a horizon line and like make our best guess. We got back to the bottom of this Russian. They thought we died because we were supposed to take a day. It was 3 days later. This big Russian guy came up and gave me this big, Petrushkin, I thought you were dead. This other guy offered to set up my tent. He was, he'd been the contractor who way back when built the U.S. Embassy that was riddled with listening devices. It's a historic story of sort of security screw up, but they built this entire U.S. Embassy. It was riddled with devices, and he was the contractor. And I said, no, you're not setting up my tent. He said, I am a normal man, but it was a great trip. Nobody died. And we did the river. The last expedition that I tried it, 5 guys died. Out of 11. So, we were all proud, and that sort of launched this career of doing adventure. And as I traveled the world doing some of these trips, it became extremely clear to me that the ecosphere was having a really rough time. And especially when I did stories that were around the oceans, because I could see that the reefs were bleaching. And so I began writing more environmental stories.
We'll get back to Peter in a minute, but before we do, I want to tell you about the new Deco case colors from Decked. Deco cases are Deck's solidly built, weatherproof, go-anywhere gear containers, and they come in a variety of sizes and configurations that allow maximum versatility for whatever ways you can dream up to utilize them. You can get them with a variety of trays and dividers, as well as foam inserts that can be customized for carrying everything from camera gear to power tools to fly reels. With a handful of new colors, including Ranger Green, Blaze Orange, and Cool Gray, you can match the case to its intended use. So Ranger Green for that low-profile blending in look, or Blaze Orange for that can't miss it, won't forget it at the campsite, this stuff is important look. Deco cases are a great way to get in on what Decked has cooking for you non-truck owners as well. And like their truck bed organizers, they are made in the USA. Shipping is always free. Visit decked.com/flyfish to learn more, and then get out there, get decked, and get after it.
And somewhere in there,
Who are you writing for?
So I was writing for Outside. I wrote for Men's Journal. I wrote for National Geographic Adventure, and had some, incredible stories. I got to go with Adventure. I got to go with Sea Shepherd on, a campaign in Antarctica to disrupt the Japanese whaling fleet, which was also epic, and also, everybody almost died.
Well, was that something that I was wondering about? That was that something? Was that an assignment where a magazine editor said, "Hey, we want somebody to go cover this," or was that you wanting to go get in there and do that?
Well, I was presenting the story about the Sangpo trip, which was another wild expedition through like the deepest gorge in the world in eastern Tibet. I'd written that book, Hell or High Water. I was at the Telluride Mountain Film Festival presenting. And I was at a lunch, an outdoor lunch. They had big round tables scattered around. And someone came up to me and said, "Hey, Peter, have you ever met that guy? See that guy over there?" And I looked, and there was this big broad shoulder back and sort of a khaki jacket and long white hair. And I could see a white beard. That's Paul Watson, Captain Paul Watson. He's radical, very. I think you should meet him. So I said, all right. So I walked over, tapped him on the shoulder. He shook my hand. The first thing he said was, "I've sunk half the Norwegian whaling fleet and half the Spanish." Nobody had ever said that to me. And then I heard him speak the next day, and he was in a 2,000-seat auditorium, and you could have heard a pin drop. He was describing a gray whale he was trying to save in the Pacific, and the Russian harpooner, shooting the whale over his head, and the whale, in the thing blowing up inside it, and, it was spewing blood and reared up, and they were running a Zodiac trying to interfere and keep the whale safe. And as this whale came down, this tons of whale came down, Watson said he could see every muscle in its body trying to keep itself off of the Zodiac, because the whale knew those guys were trying to protect him.
Yeah.
And as he sank in a gurgling blood, he said he looked at his eye, and the eye was like so full of, sort of this deep understanding and this terrible sadness. And he said that was, he knew his mission for the rest of his life. And it, there were people just crying in this auditorium, and people were just stunned. And he asked me to come with him on his next campaign and write about it. And I couldn't refuse. And then I'd followed Brad Wiener. He was a wonderful editor through all these magazines. He was at Adventure Now. And I called him up, and we had to convince the society that, they were very reluctant to do the story because they didn't want to glorify eco-terrorists, which is what they thought Sea Shepherd was, justifiably perhaps. Secondly, they thought their journalists might go native, and they didn't want that to happen. And so Watson and I had to sign this letter that said I was a non-participant. I had it laminated, so it was waterproof. I stuck it in my dry suit, because if we got rammed by the factory ship, which we almost did, and sunk, I thought I could wave it around when they, if they pick me up and say, "I got to go home, don't throw me in jail, I'm a non-participant." But of course, what happened is by day 3, I was like designated the rescue swimmer. I was the only guy with a dry suit. And, I was helping move stuff around. And I was extremely profoundly moved by that story. About 44 people on a little ship. Granted, it was all black. Granted, it had a Jolly Roger in the flying from the. Granted, it had a huge blade on the starboard steel, triple reinforced T-steel, sharp for gutting the hulls of ships. Granted, all of that. I was moved that 44 people, maybe the only 44 people on the entire planet out there on this little ship in force 8 gales with 40-foot seas, trying to give voice to another species and trying to protect another species that couldn't protect itself.
Yeah.
And risking their lives to do it. The only people on Earth actually right then risking their lives for another species that couldn't speak.
Yeah.
So, that experience, the Cove experience when I went with those guys, it sort of affirmed for me and encouraged me to keep writing environmental stories. And so I did.
Did those experiences, being out there with Sea Shepherd and doing these insane kayaking descents, did that sort of scratch a similar itch for you? Or was there, I'm wondering if there's a way that those two experiences for you were similar in a way, kind of, pushing yourself, being on the edge a little bit. Do you think there's sort of the same hunger for experience happening there? Maybe that's not exactly the right way to put it, but was there something similar in those two things, even though they're quite different?
Yeah, I think that, I think for me, once I open myself to be fully engaged in my life and a really rich life where, rich meaning that I have to open myself to new experiences to have a rich life. And to do that, I have to stretch and be uncomfortable and probably be afraid, be vulnerable. I think once I do that, then I'm also going to be sensitive and sensible to the plight of others. And, especially being out in wild country, the plight of other species that live there. I think it's just an openness, to life. And
how did you find the reserves or the sort of self-awareness to allow yourself to be uncomfortable in those ways?
I don't know. I mean, I think I loved when I was really little, I remember, being on a beach in the Long Island Sound in storm, and I was 6. And the waves, I think about it now, they were beach break and they were really big. And I just remember body surfing and getting completely hammered, and tumbling and just loving it. And, getting up, shaking myself off, and, it was freezing. I think my lips were blue. And just, here was one rears up again and just diving under it and jumping over. And I just loved it. And I think those were my first experiences of being sort of like held, cradled, swept, tumbled, trashed by, a force that was much bigger than me. I loved it. Yeah. And I think I loved losing myself in that. And I think, you guys are Fly Fish Journal. And I think one of the things, and I think everybody loves about fishing, of course, is that, you forget your name and you forget you're a human. And, it's like somehow the focus on the wind and the light and the cast, the presentation, and the all of that, somehow all that intense focus somehow paradoxically expands your awareness. The circle of awareness, expands out so that it encompasses, the wooded canyon and then the mountains above that you can see upstream, and then the sky and maybe something bigger even. And it's thrilling. And I just love it.
Well, with the nonfiction stuff, so you kind of had this series of books. I think there's 4 nonfiction books that you published. And was the most recent one Kook?
No, the most recent one is called Burn, and it's about
Well, most recent fiction is Burn, right?
Yeah. Oh, the
But
most recent nonfiction. Yeah. I think it is Kook.
was Kook,
Yeah.
which would have been
2007 or something.
2007.
Yeah. Oh, no, sorry. That was the trip. So probably 2010. Yeah.
2010 or so.
Yeah.
I am curious just about that as somebody who also got into surfing later in life. Like what spurred that on? I know.
I'm sorry, you're a fisherman and a surfer.
I know.
You're totally screwed. I
Totally
can't
screwed.
say the F word on
Totally
the
screwed.
podcast.
Oh, you can. But yeah, it's one of
fucked.
my greatest regrets is that I didn't somehow learn about surfing earlier on.
You know, Jason, we're all right. I think it's good we didn't, because if we had, we wouldn't maybe have written, we wouldn't have fished, we wouldn't have friends, we wouldn't be married, or whatever we are right now. Because surfing is so incredibly compelling, and it's just so immersive. Like, I love to surf. I mean, there's a couple of things I love more than anything. One is surfing. I love to fish. And I love to drink coffee on a good porch and eat ibuprofen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great. It's so fun.
What spurred that on? Writing Kook for one thing, but
The surfing?
Yeah.
I didn't learn to surf till I was 45. And, a water person, you're comfortable in violent water. You like that. So, okay, good. Like to ski. So there's something about, balance. And my friend, he was a lawyer in Chicago and he got transferred to Huntington Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a guy who raised in South Carolina, wears, flannel shirts, has little wire rim glasses and plays banjo. Not kidding. One of the smartest guys I've ever met. And loves to tell a good story in that beautiful, South, sort of subtle South Carolina accent. And he gets transferred to Huntington Beach. Beach culture is not his thing, but he was a kayaking friend. We kayaked in the mountains of North Carolina together. And he said, I'm having a rough time over here. I got a week off. You want to come learn to surf with me? And I was like, sure. So I borrowed board and a wetsuit, and we ran out to the pier at Huntington Beach.
Nice.
Bad idea.
Yeah.
You don't want to start your first surf at the pier at Huntington Beach. You're going to get killed.
Kind of graduate school surfing sometimes, right?
Well, it's ground zero for so many careers, and you got all these really good surfers there. I think within the first hour, my life was threatened 3 times. Some guy, with long blonde hair and a snake tattoo going into his wetsuit on his neck going, "You fucking kook, get the fuck out of the water or I'll fucking kill you." And I just thought, okay, I'll get 100 yards away from the guy or 50 yards away from the guy, not knowing I was right down wave. And then he tries to slice my head off with his fin. It was crazy. And so after a few days of that, we went up to Seal Beach, and this battered van pulled up. It said M&M Surf School, all these foam boards on top with duct tape around them. This huge guy gets out with a big belly, and he stretches his wetsuit over his belly. He's got this long blonde streaked hair. And all of a sudden, all these buff surfers come from all over the parking lot to get their hug. He bestows hugs. And all I hear is like, "I love you, man. I love you too." And we're like, what the heck is this? This isn't anything like what, this is a different culture. So it turns out this guy is called the Saint of Seal Beach. He was a Hell's Angel telephone line, and he fell off a pole, fractured his right leg completely. He has pins. It's all fused. They said he'd never walk again. He had been a surfer, and he taught himself to surf again with a totally stiff peg leg. And he thought, if I can teach myself, I can teach anyone. He started teaching autistic kids with cerebral palsy, 89-year-old women. And he became so good at it, and he's so big-hearted that celebrities came from Hollywood. Investment bankers would come from Chicago for 2 days with a guy. He was this amazing teacher. So Mark and I just took classes with him for 5 days, and that basically upended my life forever.
Yeah. At what point did you come out come out west? Because you grew up in New York,
Right.
went to school in New England.
Yeah, I went to high school in Vermont. I had cousins in Putney, Vermont. My dad's brother and his family, there was like a heller on every hill. So I went to high school there.
Okay.
I wanted to be in the country. So
Yeah.
I loved it. Went an hour up.
Were your folks still in New York?
Yeah,
when you
yeah,
went
yeah.
out?
I just begged them to go.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that was great. And, I think my first project was to go into the woods for a week with no food, no tent.
In high school?
I was 15. I weighed 129 pounds and just had snare wire, some matches, a pot, a knife.
Yeah.
And lost 13 pounds in a week.
Wow.
But I hand sewed a suit teepee and lived in that for a year. My senior year, cut all the firewood, and it was 30 below that winter a lot, and it was cold. But it was great. And then, so then I came out. This guy Landis, who I ended up living with in Boulder later, and another couple of buddies were heading out west for the summer to kayak, and they invited me, and I came, and first thing we did was go to the Arkansas River over by Buena Vista, and it was a flood year.
Mm-hmm.
It was running like 5,000, and they put me on the numbers, and it was class 5. With that level. And so basically they tried to kill me. And for the rest of the summer, I did like trout surveys I was upside down half the time.
Yeah.
But I thought, I'd never been west, and we were kayaking. When you kayak in Vermont, New Hampshire, you kayaking in early April, and there's snow on the banks and ice in the water, and it's freezing rain, and your socks are literally frozen because we had socks back then, wool socks.
Yeah. And
you're drying them on the defrost, trying to get them warmed up. And here we were, it was like 90 degrees. It was big water. There were elk in the meadows. There were snow-capped peaks, and your stuff dried out in 5 minutes. And I was like, I'm coming back here. After college, I'm coming back here. This is cool.
Yeah. So this is, what time was this?
This was 1980. I graduated in 82. So
from Dartmouth?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
So, and it was back, like, as you said, kayaking early. It was early in kayaking where if you saw a kayak on the highway, you knew them.
Yeah.
Or they were friends of your friend.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's what I was kind of wondering is, I imagine there weren't a lot of other people writing about kayaking.
No, I don't think so. And that's, that's why I got the job.
Well, that's
it's like, I got a blue ribbon for being the only one in the race.
It really says a lot about what Outside Magazine kind of created back then, just sort of giving voice to people like you, people that have a very rich, serious creative life, but also have a very rich, serious outdoors life, people that are chasing something, people that are hungry, and they're not just sitting in a, garret in Brooklyn, New York, plunking away at a typewriter. They're out, pushing themselves.
Yeah.
And, says a lot for what they, I guess, engendered in a way.
No, it was very special. And for me, my writing life my career, I guess, wouldn't have happened without that, without the faith of somebody like Laura Honhold, who I'm forever indebted to. I just love her, for saying, I'm going to take a chance on you. I think she read the Harper story and thought, okay, this guy can string a sentence together.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I realized later I was dispensable because they didn't know me. If I perished on the trip, okay.
I'll send this guy.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
Right.
That's great. Well, so from the outside, I've obviously been reading a bunch about you and just kind of getting ready for this. But from the outside, it seems like there was sort of 20-ish years of Peter Heller, the correspondent, nonfiction book writer, journalist, doing that stuff. And then 2012, I think you published The Dog Stars. And it's, the last almost 15 years, your focus has been fiction. And I wonder if that's something if it feels that way to you, if that's something you're conscious of, this sort of two parts of your writing life. And is that something that, was that conscious in any way?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Did it just happen?
No, it didn't just happen. I mean, the thing is since that 11-year-old boy read In Our Time, I wanted to do that. And I had to make a living. And so the 20 years I was writing for magazines, imagine that job. Going to Antarctica with Sea Shepherd, going, to the Tibetan Plateau to kayak, to having people actually send you to these places and coming back and writing about them, which is, what I loved more than almost anything was to write stories and create good stories. And it was like a dream job. And yet it was a joyful diversion, because what I really wanted since I was a little boy was to write, to be a great writer, a literary writer. And I knew when I was doing all this that it was a diversion. And so I tried to use it as cross training. I kept my eye on the prize. I knew that eventually I was going to get there. I was going to save up enough money to try and write something.
Were you writing fiction and or poetry that whole time?
Yes. And I was writing short stories. I was writing poems. At one point when I was 32, I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop and I studied fiction and poetry. I took kind of a 1.5 break from journalism. And then I got
what was that experience like?
It was really cool. I applied to both. There's a poetry program and a fiction program. And it's so hard to get in to either one that I applied to both because I was doing both.
Well, and it's, for people that don't know, the Iowa Writers Program, Iowa Writers Workshop is one of the preeminent sort of MFA programs for
on Earth
writers. On Earth. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was kind of the first to sort of put that model into practice. In some ways, wasn't it?
I don't know much about the history of it, but I know that lots and lots of really, fine writers came out of there.
Yeah.
Lots of famous writers. And somehow they came out of there. And me, trying to follow Mark Twain's, example, I never let school get in the way of my education. I was sort of staunchly believe that.
Yeah.
I didn't even go to my own graduation at college. I was just like, I learned the difference between a spruce and a pine. I learned how to read great books. I'm out of here, But there was a point where I'd been writing for Outside for a while, and I was writing for a certain amount per word, and I was writing for their adventure package and all this. And I thought, I really miss being around people that think poetry is the most important thing. And, so I applied to the poetry program and the fiction program, thinking I would double my odds because it was like 35 to 1 or something to get in. And I got into both, and I decided to do both. And nobody does that. I think there's been one other person in history who did it.
Yeah.
Because it's really two separate schools.
Yeah.
So I go to the poetry and the seminar, and everyone is pretty young. They're mostly just out of college. They're hyper intellectual. They're all wearing black. And they have little wire rim Yeatsian glasses, and they're talking about negative capability and all this, from Keats and all this stuff. And I'm just like, whoa. Okay. And then I go to the fiction class, 2 hours later, and it's just all people like me and Jeans and who are older like me, have families, a lot of them. They have a lot of experience, and they just want to learn to tell a good story.
Yeah.
And I love both sort of cohorts because the poets were so deeply committed to poetry and the music of language and the distillation and the cadences and rhythms. I ended up rooming with this British guy who was a painter and a poet, and he would say, "Hey, Pete, listen to this," and he would just read me a line from John Donne, and just for the cadence of that one line, "She's dead, dead, she's dead." It's like just being around people who cared about that kind of thing was so invigorating for me. I loved it, and I ended up writing, kind of fusing both, and writing a long epic poem about a really bad guy in the Old West. I got a grant. When I graduated, I went for 3 semesters, and they let me go home for the 4th one and to work on this poem. But I got a year grant to work on this epic poem, which was just the coolest thing. After being a journalist under the gun, trying to pay the mortgage, to be able to focus on one poem, which was a string of separate poems, for a year was just magnificent. But anyway, I followed an editor. So I was still writing for, I followed this guy, Brad Wieners. I think now, I don't know if he's still as of this month, but I think he's the head of content at at Patagonia at the Journal. But he went for, he was an outside editor, and then Adventure, then Men's Journal, I think is how it went. And I followed him. And then he calls me, and he's the editor-in-chief of Business Week. And he calls and said, "Hey, Pete, do you want to write for Business Week?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because, dude, it's Business Week." Yeah. And he said,
outside.
Yeah. He said, "Look," he said, "you can write about anything you want. Just put a pie graph in there." And so it turns out you can put a pie graph in anything.
Yeah.
I mean, there's dollars and cents in every single story. So I had a blast writing for him. I was the only journalist undercover at the BP headquarters during the Gulf oil spill. And I wrote a story like no one else, because I discovered when I was there, I was supposed to be doing a feel-good story about rescuing turtles. And I discovered that BP was running the Coast Guard and the military, where it was supposed to be the military, the U.S. government with their thumb on BP saying, fix this, clean it up, punishment. But it turned out BP was running the show. And, I did stories like that. It was great. And after a little while, they were paying, like more money than anyone had ever paid me before. And I thought, I think I have 9 months that I could not take a story. It was the first time I was 50. It's time, it's time to go write that novel you've been wanting to write since you were a little kid. And so I went up to the coffee shop up here, the same one I met my wife, Kim, who you just met. And I sat down, and I didn't, like all the nonfiction stories I'd done, I knew what the ending was going to be, and I knew what was going to happen next because it happened. They were nonfiction. I didn't want to know. I wanted it to be like a river expedition where, you put on a narrative current and you take it into territory that's never been explored and where I've never been. And you come around a corner, you don't know what's going to be there. I wanted that kind of thrill. And I wanted to have as much fun as the reader. I didn't want a plot. I read John Gardner's book on writing novels where, it's outline, smaller A's and B's and C's and 1s and 2s until you have a book. I was like, I could be a lawyer, if I was going to do that. That doesn't sound like fun. So I didn't know if it was legal to just start with the first line or if anyone did it. So I called my friend Carl. He's my best friend in high school. He was the showrunner for Lost. He's got tons of big TV shows. Great, writer, screenwriter. I said, Carlton, you've worked with a lot of novelists. Do you know anyone who just starts with the first line and doesn't have a clue? He didn't even hesitate. He said, yeah, man, I work with Stephen King. And he often just starts with a voice. Voice is a character. Character's in a place. There's a situation, because there's always a situation. And he writes into the story. Yeah. It's like, whoa. And then he said something that's totally surprised me. He said, I worked with Elmore Leonard. Those tightly plotted, seemingly fast-paced crime stories in South Florida or whatever. He said, oftentimes, he has no clue. He just starts. It's some guy in a bar, probably a strip bar because it's Elmore Leonard. And he's just talking. And so it gave me permission, and I sat down, I wrote, I keep the beast running. I keep the 100 low lead on tap. I foresee attacks. And a few lines later, my name is Hig, one name. big hig if you need another. If I ever woke up crying in the middle of a dream, and I'm not saying I did, it's because the trout are gone. Every one. I just got goosebumps, man. I sat up. I was in the middle of the coffee shop, and I thought, speak. I'm listening.
That's it for today. Stay tuned for part 2, where we dig into Peter's fiction writing process and work, and how fly fishing has come to shape various aspects of that work. As always, thanks for listening to Sidechannels, presented by the Fly Fish Journal. Sidechannels is produced and edited by me, with production support from Jeff Galbraith and Colin Wiseman, and digital and web support from Jesse Lou Galbraith, Colby Messick, and Kopi Vojta. Thanks as well to our sponsors, Decked. Get decked and get after it at decked.com/flyfish. And Patagonia, dependable gear built to connect with wild fish. Visit patagonia.com/fly-fish to learn more. And of course, if you're enjoying Sidechannels, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to rate and review the show. It makes a big difference. It helps others find the podcast. Have fun out there, enjoy the process, and we'll see you in a couple weeks with part 2 of our interview with Peter Heller.